Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. It's Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast, and it is brought to you locally by Caesars Entertainment Group of Atlantic City. Come experience the ultimate sports destinations all season long. Wild Wild West, Tropicana, Harrah's Resort, Atlantic City. Book your game day experience today at Caesars.com. I'm Mike Gill. Follow me on Twitter at Mike Gill Show. This is Football at 4. Andrew DiCecco is on the phones. If you're watching the live video on our YouTube channel, you'll see Andrew's picture up on the screen as we are set to give you another edition of Football at 4, Week 14. Andrew is in the books. Let's start with that as get your thoughts on the Dallas and Washington game. And, that game kind of puts Dallas, obviously, in the big-time driver's seat here. What did you learn from Washington on Sunday after the way that game went with Dallas?
That's a team that, they're certainly beatable, and you don't know if that was just an off week for them. But I think that they're a team that can turn it on at any point, given what they have to work with offensively. And obviously their defensive line is always going to keep them in the game. But Dallas is clearly proven to be the elite team of the NFC East. They're going to sit atop the rankings, and it's really going to be interesting, Mike, to see what happens here over the next couple of weeks, particularly with the Eagles and obviously the Washington football team. We'll see what happens with Taylor Heineke, his status this week. I think that he might end up playing, so we'll have to see how that goes. But it should be a fairly even matchup, I would think, going into Sunday.
Yeah, let's take a little bit. We'll go a little deeper on the matchups on Thursday when Andrew's back. But we take a look now. You've got Washington in the spot at 6 and 7. They are the 7th seed. But there are 5 teams that are all 6 and 7, and you have 2 teams that are 5 and 8. With Seattle and Carolina. So I guess you would say there are 7 teams still in the mix for one spot in this NFC playoff field. How important is the winner of the Washington-Philadelphia game in this playoff race? Is this a must-have for both of these teams? Can they make it up the second time they play? Or do you think the team that wins on Sunday, or that one of these 2 teams, the one that wins on Sunday, is still in the race and the other team is out?
I think the Eagles need to take care of business on Sunday and not necessarily look to down the road. When you have you have a team like Washington that you're up against and vying for a playoff spot, you have to go in there as a game-by-game basis and know that you need to win to stay alive. And I think that's the mentality both teams need to have going into this week. And it is of the utmost importance for both teams to come out of Sunday with a win. So. It's going to make it a very tough sledding, Mike, whoever's the loser of this game. So it is very important.
All right. To do so, let's take a look at what has to happen here because 14 weeks in, I'm not sure what we know and don't know. Here's what I think I know, Andrew. I think I know what the Eagles do well on offense. They run the ball well. I'm not sure that that's who they want to be, but I think that's what they do well. I don't know what they want to be on defense. So let's start with that. What do they and what should they be on defense?
Well, it's tough. It's tough to really gauge what they could be or what they should be because you don't know what Jonathan Gannon really had in mind when he took the role. And I think he's sort of figuring out his personnel as the season goes, and it'll be interesting to see how he chooses to overhaul that to his vision over the offseason. But I think right now, given what they have, you've invested a ton in your defensive line. You also have a secondary that I think has underperformed, but they're competent, right? There's a veteran secondary that you can win with. And I think that they need to have a little bit more responsibility on their plates. I think you need to see a little bit more blitzing, a little bit more of a physical element to Jonathan Gannon, and I think he's proven that he can do that. He just has not been consistent enough in doing that, always attacking these weaker offensive lines and sort of sitting back and being passive against some of the better quarterbacks or some of the more stout offensive lines. But I think down the stretch here, you're facing a couple of offensive lines that aren't particularly stout or strong or capable. So I think you need to, in order to keep your offense in it that's been really inconsistent, I think you need to pressure these quarterbacks, force them into a mistake, and maybe steal a possession or two defensively as a result. I think that needs to be the approach moving forward.
All right. On the offensive side of the ball, would you agree that that's who they should be, do you anticipate that they're going to stick with that over these last 4 weeks? That you agree that they should be a run-first team, and do you think that they will stick with that pattern these last 4 games?
Well, it's proven to be a winning formula for them, and they're able to churn out first downs, and the offense looks far more rhythmic when they take to the running game than when they were sitting back there and asking Jalen Hurts or to stand back there and 35 and throw the ball 35, 40 times a game. I don't know that that's the offense that they're ready for right now. They also don't have the skill players to really execute that type of offensive mentality. But what I will say is I think that they are going to stick to the running game, control the clock, really minimize what the opposition is able to do offensively by keeping them on the sideline. Really just play that ball control style of offense, especially when you're playing these divisional games where I do anticipate all of them being somewhat closely contested because you know how those games go with the NFC East. So I think it's going to be a ground and pound type of approach for this final stretch here. And I mean, look, if the Eagles had it, if it was an ideal situation, the Eagles want to be a passing team, but they're not ready for that right now. They're not built for that right now. So this is really what you're probably going to see coming up.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not to say this team should turn into Navy by any stretch. I mean, they do have right? They do have to get their passing game going. But if somebody says, like, Andrew, how do they get their passing game? What do you want to see from their passing game?
Well, I think you're going to see a lot more tight end usage. I think the middle of the field needs to be utilized far more than it has been. You have a tight end in Dallas Goedert that proved, granted it was against the Jets, but you saw the type of mismatches that he's able to create and how teams need to account for him. And I think that he's a guy that when you don't have a lot of size, the skill players at the skill positions, he's someone that you can move around and who command a lot of attention and therefore will occupy a lot of coverage and free things up for his teammates. So I think he needs to be a focal point down the stretch, and I also think that they need to utilize the running backs in the passing game. You have a guy like Kenny Gainwell, who I think should see his production ramp up here, and Devontae Smith. You got to find ways to get him the football. I think that there's been too many times where he sort of disappears, and it's not because he's not getting open. It's because of the way the game is going. Quarterbacks aren't seeing him. There's plays that are being left on the field. I think he needs to be a more consistent presence in the offense, and that's really going to be the recipe for success.
I like the tight end, getting him involved. I like you started with that as well. Obviously, Smith, I'd like to see him getting going a little bit more over these last 4 weeks here, but to do so, you're going to have to obviously get some sort of production, you would think, from Watkins, Rieger, somebody on that other side to make a play here or there. It's almost incumbent that somebody like that is going to have to make a play in one of these games for them to, pull off a win. You can't expect Smith and Goddard every single week to do something for you. So Watkins, Rieger, one of those guys. What about that offensive line up front? I'd like to get your thoughts on if Brandon Brooks is back. Do you anticipate he slips right back in at right guard? And if he's playing at the same level, how much better can this offensive line be over the last 4 games?
If Brandon Brooks is healthy, absolutely. I can see him being a plug-and-play option. It's a set-it-and-forget-it, no-brainer move there. And the offensive line's already playing well. They have a cohesiveness to their unit right now. They're driving guys off the ball and just dominating. And I think that adding a player of Brandon Brooks' caliber into that mix is going to really ascend them to probably you can make a case for the top 2, top 3 offensive lines in football right at the right time. And I think that this is where you're going to see them lean on the running game and drive guys off the ball. And, obviously when you see the weather get cold like this, the Eagles have a good formula right now for winning football. Now it's about execution, paying attention to details, and taking a one game at a time approach. Because when you overlook guys like you do, like they did against the Giants, you saw what happens. And you come out, you don't look focused, you're committing errors, and you're giving the game away to a team that's vastly inferior.
Yeah, there's no question. You can't stumble at this stage of the season. You can't have that off week. And it's very well, Andrew, that we might look back at that Giant game and say that was the one that really did them in. I mean, at this stage of the season, that late, when you have a bad loss this late in the season, sometimes they do play a factor, and that Giant one might be the one that does it. To not have that happen against Washington, what's the best way to attack that Washington team, to make sure that they don't have that, type of game? Because the tricky part for me with this game is Washington's got a really good defense.
Yeah, they do. So I think what you need to do is, and I think what happened in the Giants game is they didn't really commit to the run early and later on they did, but I think that there was missed opportunities early. They need to stay with it, commit to it. Yeah, it might be tough sledding early on, but you have to just keep going because eventually one's going to pop. You're going to have a healthy trio of running backs, play to their strengths, shuffle them in and out, do these short passes, the check down game, and get Dallas Goedert involved because the second level for Washington, if you're going to exploit an area, they're very slow-footed, and I think they can be taken advantage of, particularly vertically. So what happens is I think Dallas Goedert needs to be a key cog in the game plan this week, and I think that if they're able to do that and come out strong and focused and have that keen attention to detail, they'll be able to come out on top against Washington.
Okay, this team is really predicated on getting pressure, right? I mean, that's what they really want to do. They don't like to blitz all that much. They've gotten lit up by the upper-tier quarterbacks. They're going to face Tyler Heineke this week, Daniel Jones next week, Dak Prescott in the final week, Heineke again, obviously, in a couple of weeks here. So does John Gannon go after these guys?
These are the type of opponents that you've seen Jonathan Gannon be a little bit more aggressive against, quarterbacks that aren't necessarily fleet-footed and they're prone to turnovers or, things that can sort of shift momentum. And I think that you're going to see an influx of pressure being applied to these quarterbacks. Maybe not so much at Dak Prescott, but I think for, Daniel Jones, and you're going to see that against Taylor Heineke, and that's really what they need to do because they can't just sit back there and get picked apart in the short to intermediate areas of the field because he'll just march his way down the field, and we've seen what quarterbacks can do. You even saw Zach Wilson have success doing that for at least the first half of the game a couple weeks ago. So you got to be aggressive. You can't take your foot off the gas.
I'm very interested to see John Gannon's defense. I think to me, that is the biggest unknown, Andrew, about this team and who they are and is what kind of defense am I going to get from week to week? That to me is the biggest kind of, conundrum over these last 4 weeks of what is John Gannon's defense going to be? Because, if you just told me, hey, in the games against the average teams, which, let's be honest, most of their schedule has been average teams, they've handled themselves pretty well. It's the games that they've played up in competition that they've really struggled. And at least 3 of these games, you're playing average to bad teams. So I don't know. Do you go into saying I can count on this defense this week?
Oh, I think recent history has shown that you can't just go in there and sort of hang your hat on the defense and have full confidence that they're going to be able to confidently execute the game plan and keep the Eagles in this game. I think that, like you said, it's been very turbulent, their production week to week, and you don't really know what kind of game they're going to turn in. So I think that on paper, Mike, it looks like they're going to, as we've seen, he's a little bit more aggressive against these quarterbacks that aren't necessarily upper echelon. And I think you could see a turnover or two this week. So, I think that you can. I think that they're going to have success this week. But if this season has taught me anything, just never go into it with any sort of assumption because that's when you get fooled. So I think that they have the pieces to be successful against that offense, but we're going to have to see what his approach looks like coming out of the bye.
That's for sure. A lot of fool's gold week to week in this league, as we know. And let's take a look at Washington's losses, too. I mean, you take a look at Chase Young's out. Sweat didn't play. They've got COVID issues. They got injury issues there. This is this week, too, where you can't overlook the fact that they're banged up and you're coming off the bye. I mean, that's stuff like that sometimes. It's like almost overconfidence kind of, siphons into the equation here. And you're like, this team doesn't have the room of error to be able to have overconfidence at this stage of the season.
Right. And when the Eagles have fallen flat, is that they come in there, you get the perception that they're having that this is going to be a breeze, and they're having this working against them. They don't have that. They're, in this case, the Washington football team's depleted due to COVID reasons. You have to go in there, like I said, even keel. The score is even. You have to just assume that the game's a must-win, which it is, and go in there and execute the game plan, and do not at any time take your foot off the gas, which has been a problem for the Eagles in the second half of games when they have gotten the lead. You saw that even in the Jets game, and it just makes it so much easier for offenses to claw their way back. And I think that if there's anything that I can nitpick for Nick Sirianni, who has shown tremendous growth the second half of the season, it's, continue, don't get complacent, and, keep your foot on the gas pedal at all times, and, you can't just cruise to victory.
Yeah, that's for sure. This is and look, the Washington football team, it's usually Dallas, Dallas week, and you got the Giants, that rivalry because they're so close. Washington's like the third one in the East that kind of gets pushed aside, but I feel like there's been so many disappointing losses against Washington in the past. That the game that got Chip Kelly fired, that was a Saturday where the Washington beat the Eagles there. They've had chances to make playoff games where they've had these mediocre years, and Washington seems to always get in the way. But this Washington team, they won the division last year. They won 4 in a row. Then before they finally lost that game against Dallas. Right now, you got Washington, Minnesota, Philadelphia, Atlanta, and New Orleans. They're all 6-7. Of that group, who is the best team on paper?
Probably Minnesota, I would say, with a veteran quarterback, top-end receivers, good running game, decent defense. I think that they have the components to make a late-season surge here. I don't know that any of those teams, Mike, are going to be very effective in the playoffs. But if you're asking me to pick out of the bunch, I would probably say the Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah, that team, man, Andrew, they are so Jekyll. They beat Green Bay. They lose to Detroit. I mean, they are so hard. All these teams, though. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes this such a – I mean, you have 5 teams all 6-7. I mean, to me, it's – I don't know if that's good, bad, parity, mediocrity, what it is. But there are 5 teams right now all tied with the same exact record. The Vikings own the tiebreaker over Philadelphia based on common wins. The next tiebreaker, they're tied, which is conference record. I think the next tiebreaker, that is strength of victory. And there's a scenario that could get to that, and Minnesota would have that over Philadelphia. So it makes these games every single week. You cannot slip up at this point because the tie-breaking scenarios come into play here. Let me get Washington's offense in your mind. Is this a challenging type of offense for Philly's defense?
I've seen offenses that don't have a whole lot going on give the Eagles defense trouble this year, and randomly. So they have some pieces there, and Antonio Gibson and do-it-all running back that can catch the ball and get out to get on the sideline and break a long play, and J.D. McKissick. Their offensive line's nothing special. The defensive line should be able to have their way. We'll see what happens with McLaurin. I'm not sure what the latest is on him, but he's a game breaker that can dominate at any point. So, I mean, they do have – and Taylor Heineke, to me, is a quarterback that plays within the system and takes what defenses gives him. He doesn't necessarily – he's not going to win the game, but he's not necessarily going to lose the game either. He's sort of like a steady Eddie type guy as a placeholder until they find someone else. But I think that the fact that the running game is clicking, and it sort of alleviates some of the pressure on him. And they do have some guys that can give the Eagles some trouble. So we're going to have to see what Jonathan Gannon has schemed up coming out of the bye.
I feel like, who was it for years? Who was the slot guy they had for years that used to
Jamison
Crowder. He's with the Jets now. I feel like he killed them every single time they played. That's now turned into McLaurin, McKissick, those guys. These little slot scat guys. Now McLaurin's obviously more better than a slot guy, but
before that it was Santana Moss.
Yep, I feel like there's always some guy who has his best, game against the Eagles, and you're like, what? This guy doesn't do anything all year. McKissick's the name, Antonio Gibson too. They basically, I feel like, said, look, we're gonna try to run the ball, and they've done such a good job of running the ball the last couple of weeks in their win streak, too. So I think that's going to be another interesting storyline of these two teams trying to run the ball against each other.
Yeah, I think Antonio Gibson's going to be a big-time player in this game, and I think he commands 20-plus carries a game. He's built for that, and I think that's what you're going to see. And it's going to be, what can the Eagles defense do? Can they rise to the occasion and stop the run and really force Taylor Heineke to beat you with his arm? Or is it going to be a game where they sort of exchange blows? It's going to be, I'm not necessarily sure how this one's going to unfold because both teams have been streaky and unpredictable. But I think, to me, the X factor in this game is going to be J.D. McKissick because of his receiving elements and his ability to get to that second level and create mismatches and move around formations. He's a quick twitch athlete. He's a player to watch this week.
Definitely. And, we will break down the matchups a little bit later in the week when Andrew's back on Thursday. We'll try to dive a little deeper into the matchups, what's some of the places to keep an eye on, where this game could be won. Because, really, this is the big one right here. The division clinching scenario, by the way. Dallas would win the NFC East with a win, and basically a Philadelphia win this week would clinch the division for Dallas. So that would show you that Washington pulls back to the pack, and if Philly wins, they would take over Washington and pass them in the wild card spot. Big game this week. You can hear it live on 97.3 ESPN. All right, there you go. Football at 4, a lot of Eagles conversation. Week 15 starts Thursday night, and Andrew will be back on Thursday. All right, my man, we'll talk football then.
Sounds good, Mike. Talk to you Thursday.
You got it. Andrew DiCecco, Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. You can check that out over at InsideTheBirds.com, wherever you listen to your podcast.